Temptation is a complex topic in discussions about our faith. We have learned to understand that we are never free from the temptation to sin as far as we live on earth. We are then advised in 1 Peter 5 verse 8 to stay vigilant at all times because Satan, who is the mastermind behind temptation, is cunning as the serpent and would look to capitalize on even our slightest show of weakness to make us backslide into sin. However, our biggest confusion about temptation is trying to make out why God allows Satan's manipulation on us, his children. A deep probe into this would highlight the concept of free will and why God intervening would violate our free will, better described as the gift of the liberty to choose. But how do we stay vigilant when we do not know what to expect? How do we prepare for the many schemes of Satan when we know him to be very crafty? And finally, how do we even detect the traps of the evil one when all we have of him is an idea and nothing tangible like every other thing on earth? The story about King David and Bathsheba has all the answers to these questions. According to 2 Samuel 11, one evening in the spring, particularly a time that the king's men and the Israelites' army were off to war to fight the Ammonites, King David, who had stayed back in his palace in Jerusalem, rose from bed to have a walk on the palace rooftop. But just as David walked around, he saw Bathsheba bathing. He found her extremely alluring and beautiful, so he sent a messenger to fetch her. The messenger informed the king that Bathsheba was the wife of Uriah, one of the king's highest military officials, but David would not mind. The king gets whatever he wants always, doesn't he? So, when Bathsheba came, he slept with her, then afterwards, sent her back home. The Bible further explains that Bathsheba at that time was still experiencing her monthly blood flow, otherwise described as monthly uncleanness, so she got pregnant a few months after. Bathsheba later reported back to King David that she had taken seed. But this potential embarrassment couldn't possibly get out, could it? Imagine risking your life at war front for your king and country, only to return home and find out that the same king had impregnated your wife? Dreading from what could have possibly been the highest cruelty against a loyal servant, David arranged for Uriah to come back home to possibly get intimate with his wife, Bathsheba, because in reality, which soldier would not love the idea to return back to their families? But after summoning Uriah, having a royal dine with him and finally showering him with gifts, the loyal military officer would just not go home to his wife. A desperate King David then realized that the only means to avoid embarrassment was to get rid of Uriah. So, he arranged with his commander of the Israelite army, Joab, to place Uriah at where the battle was fiercest. But that was not even all of the plan. The soldiers under Uriah's wing were given the order to attack the gates even when the Ammonites shot arrows at them. The aftermath of that suicidal military campaign meant though Israel defeated the Ammonites, Uriah, alongside the soldiers under his command, all fell to what is widely regarded as the spoils of war. When it was reported to King David that Uriah had died, he took Bathsheba to be his wife, just like he did with Abigail when her husband, Nabal, died. Now, the Bible does not say much about the role Bathsheba played in all these events, neither does it mention the nature of her marriage with Uriah, except that she mourned for him after his death, like any woman was expected to, but we can always use historical contexts and later biblical texts about these characters to further explore this story, especially for the purpose of explaining that temptation is simply the next person's plot to rise or gain. In this case, what appeared to be King David's temptation to ruin was merely Bathsheba's schemes for power. Going back to that first Bathsheba and David incident, in ancient Israel, this was around 1000 to 500 years BCE, it was purely habitual for kings to walk on the palace rooftops, as the palace roofs often served as a vantage point for rulers to observe their kingdom, enjoy the breeze, and even worship. And while in ancient Middle Eastern cultures, rooftops of various households were often flat and used for various activities, including bathing, Bathsheba's timing must also be taken into great consideration. If it was purely habitual of her to bath on her rooftop, then we would definitely have known. That night being their first encounter leaves room for further probing. Then again, who in Israel did not know of King David's troubles with women? 1 Samuel 17 gives a hidden message about David's character, that even though he fought Goliath in the name of God, the incentive to marry Saul's daughter was part of his motivations to fighting that battle. The biblical text highlights how David kept asking the Israelite soldiers what would be done for the man who defeated Goliath, and every time, they all said the same thing: the king will give great wealth to the man who kills Goliath. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. The emphasis here is on Saul's daughter. Again, the ease with which David fell in love at first sight on meeting Abigail in 1 Samuel 25 gives another hint about David's insatiable appetites. Remember, before Abigail, he already had 2 wives. Finally, when Absalom avenged his sister, Tamar, by killing his brother, Amnon, then later fled Israel, 2 Samuel 14 explains that Joab, one of the king's loyalists, played to King David's weak spot for women by masterfully using a woman from Tekoa to petition the king to call for the return of Absalom, and guess what? It worked. So, the Bible gives us this impression that David was a man that women did not need much to impress. And Bathsheba, being not any other woman, but the wife of David's most trusted military official, knew the king's weaknesses too, because Uriah's position meant he had served the king for long enough to know the king's strengths and weaknesses. And for a man working in the royal court, these are the kind of conversations a husband would normally share with his wife when they are having their supposed intimate and private moments. We catch a glimpse of this scenario later in Esther 6 when, as the king's highest official, Haman usually shared stories about the happenings at the royal court with his wife, Zeresh. This is normal tradition, even in today's royal courts and government officials. So, before the incident on the palace rooftop that night, David did not know Bathsheba, but Bathsheba rather knew David. Exploring Bathsheba's marriage with Uriah, the Bible makes us understand that Uriah was a Hittite. And historically, Hittites are ancient Indo-European people originating from central Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. And the Hittites were known to have had a powerful empire around 16th to 12th centuries BCE. This piece of historical information not only reveals the diversity in King David's kingdom, but also highlights the fact that Uriah was likely a mercenary. Because as a mercenary, his loyalty towards David's military campaigns would never be questioned, and he would continue to rise in prominence, to eventually become one of David's trusted officials like it was explained in the Bible. However, that is only one side to Uriah's character, the soldier side. As a husband, he was likely the type that placed duty above everything else, possibly even above family. This explains why in 2 Samuel 11, when the king granted him permission to go back home to his wife, he chose to sleep at the entrance of the palace, amongst the servants, until he was ordered back to the battlegrounds. See, we know that soldiers relish the idea of fighting wars and earning glory for their country, but it is also true that the idea of returning home victorious to meet their families fuels them to survive. So, why then did Uriah reject the king's directive to hand him an early shower? This is where the last lid on Uriah's character is lifted. According to the Talmud, which is a collection of Jewish writings, Uriah was a Judaism convert, and as such, he held mad devotion towards his king and newly found God of Israel, Yahweh. After all, he was in a foreign land, and the best way to earn their trust was to pledge and show his fealty, right? You must be wondering what all of this meant for Bathsheba, Uriah's wife. As a dutiful soldier's wife, Bathsheba's marriage to Uriah may not have been the strongest or even the happiest in terms of emotional connection given Uriah's frequent absences to attend to matters of war. We already know from David's reign that he fought and won many wars, so you can only imagine what it meant for his loyal army heads in terms of their own personal lives, because in fact, Uriah's story makes us understand that these men did not really have a life on their own. For them, it was just war after war after war. And as a soldier husband, how do you get your home in order under such a routine? And also, for a wife of this soldier, how secured would you even feel in terms of your future in such a marriage? Another context to this ancient story is how Bathsheba, like all women of those days, literally held no power or autonomy. They depended solely on their husbands and fathers to even have an identity. Women were literally their husbands' possessions, and as such, their primary responsibility was to birth an heir. In short, women were there to satisfy their husbands' sexual appetites and need for an heir. And as the wife of a military official, knowing well that there were so many uncertainties with war, that her husband may never even return home, Bathsheba yearned for some security and a purpose, and in King David, with all that she knew about him, and his troubles with women, she saw the opportunity to get all that she wanted and more, though she had to be smart about her schemes and disguise them as cleverly as possible. So, retelling this ancient story with all that we now know, Bathsheba's motive of wanting security and autonomy led her to her rooftop to bath that evening. But that was not all. As intelligent as Bathsheba was, knowing full well how men of her time cherished their children, especially their heirs, it was her idea to trap King David with pregnancy and subsequent childbirth. You could argue that she could not have known the extents the king was going to go to keep their affair secret, but one thing was certain for her: she knew that if she bore the king a child, then because this child would later be deemed a share of the king's properties or kingdom like all his other children, she would also now have a solidified place in the king's kingdom. With that in mind, all that was left for Bathsheba to do was to get the king to sleep with her to become pregnant. That seemed the most difficult part, yet her intelligent self also knew that a man with lustful eyes as David only needed to be provoked with a little show of nudity. She had already calculated the time of her monthly period to know that any sexual affair she had was going to get her pregnant. Having taken note of all that, included the time the king went on his habitual strolls, all that remained was for Bathsheba to put herself at the right place at the right time, that is, take her bath at the exact moment the king strolled on the palace rooftops. And lo and behold, everything eventually played out like she planned. She was seen by King David, who could not take the image of a naked woman having her bath out of his mind. It is crucial to note that though she seemed passive, like an innocent woman taking her bath who did not have a choice when the king summoned her, Bathsheba was actually the one bending King David to her will, because in truth, she had nothing to lose in that encounter, while David had everything, especially his reputation, on the line. This not only reveals the dynamics to power play, but also the secret about temptation, that what appeared to be David's temptation was nothing other than Bathsheba's plot to attain power. In the end, David may have brought ruin to himself and chaos to his own house by succumbing to his weakness, but for Bathsheba, up and up she went in the power chain. The Bible in 1 Kings 2 verse 19 lifts the final lid on the end results of Bathsheba's schemes when her son, Solomon, became king and had a throne made for Bathsheba, his mother, at his right-hand side. And during those early years of her son's reign, as we later learned from Adonijah's failed conspiracy, nobody went to see the king without passing through his mother, Bathsheba. So, there you have it, from a dutiful soldier's wife with no stature nor autonomy, all the way up to becoming the king's mother, with her future and fate now firmly in her control. Who would have thought? This ancient David and Bathsheba story, as has been retold, explains temptation in its truest form, that while it is the devil's play to use our weaknesses to lead us astray, we are filled with all the power to either give in, or resist the urge. However, what would empower us even more to resist these sinful urges is not merely the thought of victory against the devil, but the understanding and discipline that we are not to allow ourselves to become pawns or puppets in another man's manipulation or power games, for it takes just the next person with motive to scheme. David at the time did not think he was being manipulated by Bathsheba. He thought he was the one screwing just another servant over to boost his ego as a king. It is the same way before the later feeling of guilt based on your prior knowledge of good and evil. You foremost feel some form of pride when you succumb to temptation. You feel as though you are unstoppable, but in truth, you have just fallen into the next person's traps, the next person who would now have some control over you for the rest of your life, just like Bathsheba did have over David after that evening. Even as humans going about our daily endeavors, we know that when the next person hatches a plan against us, they do not only wish for us to fall, but ultimately, they wished also that they capitalize on our fall to rise in our stead. Satan obviously has his disagreements with God, and would look to use your downfall to get over the Almighty, but that is the affair between him and God. For you and I, all we need to ask ourselves is, why does the option to sin come so appealing and easy? What does the next person stand to gain in all this? Are we really the ones in control of our destinies when we find ourselves going out of our way to accommodate the next person in, like how David had to eliminate Uriah to take his wife? Ask yourself these questions the next time you are tempted to sin, and there, you shall get to know that the price to pay for succumbing to temptation is heftier than the momentary pleasure that you might have gained in the process. Bathsheba schemed, and David easily fell into her traps. As with the fish and the bait, the fish only sees the bait and thinks it has found an easy free lunch, only to later find out when it is too late, that it was all the fisherman's ploy to trap her. Be enlightened to detect the crafty schemes of the evil one targeted at your downfall, in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.